This is Dr. Catherine Bancole Medina, and today's podcast is going to focus on the slave Celia. This particular case gives us great insight into the legal aspects of slavery, gender dynamics, and the violence that was associated with the institution of enslavement. This is a legal case out of the state of Missouri, and we should note that the state of Missouri had laws against raping women. The state of Missouri also had laws that allowed an enslaved person to defend themselves, even if it meant that they had to take a life in order to do so. Now, the period of time that we're talking about here is 1855. Now, while these laws existed in Missouri, they did not assist the slave Celia. Celia was 14 years old when she was sold to a man by the name of Robert Newsom. Robert Newsom, in the course of transporting Celia to his plantation, raped her. After that, he raped her repeatedly. And Celia had children by Newsom, and they became his property. By 1855, Celia had a relationship with an enslaved African man by the name of George. George was also on Newsom's plantation. She became pregnant, and she was not sure about the father. George wanted Celia to confront Newsom to prevent him from having sexual contact with her. In June 1855, Celia did confront Newsom, but Newsom refused. He also came back to Celia's cabin in order to assert his rights as a slave owner. Celia hit him when he refused to leave her alone. She continued to hit him, and she wanted to keep him away. She did not intend to kill him, according to the record, but Newsom did die as a result of those blows. Celia, who was frightened, tried to burn Newsom's body. She was not successful in that, and it produced the necessary evidence to bring Celia to trial. Celia did have legal representation. However, the lawyers could not effectively defend Celia. They could not defend her because slaves were not allowed to testify in court. In addition, Celia was not considered to be a victim of rape because rape did not apply to the slave population. In addition to that, it was also held that Newsom owned her as property, and therefore he could not be a perpetrator of a crime. Now, this brings us to a very important point that is often pointed out when we study the slaveocracy and the dynamics of slavery, and that is the laws only protected the slave owner. Only protected the slave owner. What this meant was that if a slave woman was raped, she was treated as if she was a piece of property that had been trespassed, and damages would have to be paid to the slave owner as a result of that. Other aspects of this case include the use of hearsay evidence, which was generally not used but was allowed in her trial. Also, the judge did not allow Celia's testimony, did not get the full discussion about the reasons why she hit Newsom in the first place, and she was convicted of murder in October 1855, and she was sentenced to death by hanging. People were outraged by this. It was a particularly vexing case because there was an appeal to the Supreme Court, but the execution was still scheduled to take place. Some people tried to kidnap Celia before her execution date, and they were actually able to do so, and they held her until after her execution date had passed. But that did not save Celia's life. They hung her in December of 1855 for the murder of her slave master, Robert Newsom. Now, when we look at the case of Celia, we also want to pay close attention to some of the key points about the slaveocracy and particularly about law. So by way of reiteration, we have that children follow the status of the mother. So that if the mother was a slave, then the children would be slaves. So this meant that the biracial children that Celia bore were slaves, as well as the children or child that Celia may have borne by the enslaved male by the name of George. Also, it is important to note that enslaved women were not regarded the same protection, were not placed in the same protected category as white women, so that a black woman could be raped and it would not have been against the law. There was also, as we saw in this case, a legal double standard when it came to enslaved Africans before the court. Proceedings could be eliminated or ignored because the slave was devalued as a human being and not attributed the same rights as whites.